Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Kamika's Heavenly Journey. I'm so happy to be here today, and I want to share with you a story. And do you know the story of Joseph? The story of Joseph in the Bible. I read through this story, and how I came upon it is that I was actually reading a Bible story at bedtime. And I said, wow, I didn't even know the story of Joseph was just so amazing. And I thought, you know what, I have to speak about this. And I decided to just go straight back to the Bible and read it. So just bear with me as I take you through the story and as I summarize as I go through, and be blessed. So Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel and Jacob, and he was as young as 17 years old when he started to have these dreams, and it was known as his talent that he was given by God. But unfortunately, his brothers didn't love him for it. He had a dream once when he went and told his brothers. He said, listen to this dream that I have. We were binding sheaves of grain. It says it in Genesis 37 verse 7. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to it. So his brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So fast forward to verse 19, his father sent him to go and help his brother in the field. And they saw him coming from afar. His brothers saw Joseph coming. And in verse 19 it says, here comes that dreamer. They said to each other, come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. So you can see where his brothers' hearts are. However, one of his brothers, Reuben, stood up and he heard this and he said, let's not take his life. He said, don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and to take him back to his father. Now, what they did, they throw him in the cistern, and they kill a goat, and the blood of the goat they used to dip his robe. So there was a robe that his father gave him that was very colorful, and they dipped his robe in the goat blood so that his father would think that he was actually killed and devoured by some ferocious animal. So when the brothers took back the robe to the father was angry. He tore his clothes, he put on sackcloth, and he mourned for him. At that point in time, he thought that his firstborn son, was gone for good. But he was still in the cistern. But after a while, there were some Midianites who were passing by, and they sold Joseph. The brothers sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So moving on with the story now. The Lord was with Joseph. Chapter 39 verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Now, Joseph was put in charge of his household. However, his wife saw him and liked what he saw. However, she wanted him to lay in bed with her. However, Joseph, being the faithful and upstanding man that he is, and God-fearing man, he refused her. Eventually, she accosted him and left his coat. He ran away. He had to run away, run out of the house. He left his coat behind. However, when his master came home, the master's wife said that it was actually Joseph who accosted her, which was a lie. And he eventually threw him into prison. Moving on to Genesis 39, verse 20. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. So are we noticing a trend? The Lord seems to be going, just favoring Joseph wherever he goes. No matter, whilst in the midst of those negative circumstances, God continued to just be with Joseph. So let me just take you now to continuing to verse 20. So the 22. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in everything he did. So now, while in prison now, a cupbearer of the king of Egypt, and the baker were also thrown in prison. And while they're in prison, they had these dreams which perplexed them. When Joseph heard about it and was asked about it, he said in chapter 40, verse 9, it says, so the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, in my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its cluster ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. So what this meant is that, and Joseph interpreted the dream that says, the 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. Now, he had another interpretation of the dream, but it didn't go so well for the baker, because the baker was eventually hanged. After Joseph said this, he said this to the cupbearer. He said, but when all goes well, will you, when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of prison. So when all went as Joseph said, the cupbearer went back to serving the king of Egypt. However, he forgot about Joseph. So Joseph spent another 2 years in prison. But what happened after that is that the king of Egypt had a dream, and he was asking others about the dream, and nobody could interpret the dream. And eventually the cupbearer said, I remember there was a Hebrew man who interpreted our dreams, and it came to pass. He was accurate. So the cupbearer now recommended Joseph. So in verse 14, so Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph in verse 15, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And I love this response that Joseph gave the king. Joseph said, I cannot do it. I cannot do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Moving on. So this shows you that he put all the glory into God. He made it very clear to Pharaoh that this is not his. It's not his talent. This was not given to him by his mother and father. It was given to him by God. Now, in moving on to verse 28, It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. So after Pharaoh explained his dream, that's how Joseph responded. And in verse 29, this was the interpretation of the dream from Joseph. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravish the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. Moving on to verse 39. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." So let me pause right there. I'm seeing a trend with the story of Joseph, that everywhere he goes, God favors him, and God puts him in a position of leadership and honor, no matter, despite any circumstance he's in. But I have a question for you. Have you been given a God-given talent? Talent is something that you are instinctively born with, that gives you unique skills and abilities. It's not learned, although it can be strengthened and practiced. When you use your talents that God has given you, and you use them to glorify God, you will experience a full life. It is through our talents that we find unique calling in our life. And you can see this through the story of Joseph. He was given the talent of interpreting dreams, and he used it to glorify God. He didn't take ownership of it, but he knew that it was given to him by God. Now, throughout the story of Joseph remained faithful to God. He feared God, and he was humble. And I came across this verse. It's in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6, where it said, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." And when I read that verse, this is exactly how Joseph's life played out. He remained humble under God's mighty hand, and God lifted him up, where he became a man of honor in the land of Egypt. There was nobody else higher than him except for Pharaoh. He was the governor of Egypt. So let me just ask the question, what are you doing with your talent? Are you honoring God with your talent? Are you being faithful to God? And are you humble with the gift that he has given you? If so, I want to remind you that God has given you your talent not for yourself, but to glorify him, as he is the giver of good gifts. So I want to end this here. I hope that someone has been encouraged and enlightened by the story of Joseph, and may you be blessed. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.